Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hash Rate. My guest today is John Durbin of Chutes, Subnet 64, which is currently the number one subnet in the Bittensor ecosystem. Hello, John.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great. So congratulations on all your success. We see Chutes all the way at the top of the charts, like the dark side of the moon was in the 70s and 80s, was like perpetually on the charts. So you guys are sort of like the dark side of the moon of the Bittensor world. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Why don't we just start off for people who don't know? There's a lot of people who watch this show who are just sort of Bittensor curious. So they've heard of Bittensor, they see the dTAO coin, but they don't really know like all the ins and outs of all the things going on in the subnets. So why don't you just tell us really briefly what Chutes is?
Yeah, so Chutes is a what they call a serverless compute platform, which is a horrible misnomer, basically, because it's always powered by servers. But what we do is we sort of abstract that complexity away from you. So, let's just walk through a quick experiment. You want to make an app, you need, at least one server, right? And say it goes super popular overnight. Well, now you're going to need N servers, and you're going to need to build a load balancer. You're going to need to build scaling mechanisms. You're going to need to install the drivers on each of them, like all this stuff. So you're going to have to do a lot of infrastructure setup. With Chutes, what we've done is we've said, you just bring your code and we will handle all of the rest. So we handle scaling, we build the Docker containers, we handle the drivers, we handle scaling as you use it more or less. We'll scale up or down. We handle user management, payments, everything. So it just simplifies the entire AI deployment stack.
And it is specifically for AI models, right? So I couldn't just sort of run my website on Chutes. It's not meant for that different use case, right?
Yes, although I don't see any reason we couldn't do that, like a CPU only version of Chutes in addition to what we do now. I mean, I think that would be actually super helpful because it would be great for us, for example, if we could decentralize our app across Chutes. That would be awesome. So I think we will see something like that soon.
Interesting. So it's sort of Squarespace like, right? Like, and I've been a CTO before, a long time ago, not recently, but yeah, no, all the steps you describe are actually quite painful and suck up a lot of time and distract you from the main mission of making a great app. It's just all this sort of infrastructure. It's like 90% of your time is spent on bullshit like that, right? Scaling and routers, and if you could just get rid of that and just have like a Squarespace thing where you're like, click, 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 boom, up and running, that's awesome. So if I don't use Chutes, what is sort of the alternative? I guess I go to AWS and I have to, what is sort of the alternative to using Chutes? Is it AWS or are there other sort of options as well?
Well, it really depends on what you're trying to do. AWS may be one option. Google, obviously, any of the hyperscalers are going to be an option. But that's going to be mainly renting raw servers. And, again, you'd have to set them all up and everything else. If your use case is purely doing inference from LLMs, you could do, ChatGPT or Claude or any of those. And then, of course, more direct sort of related products would be something like Replicate or Modal. So they both have kind of similar features where it's sort of arbitrary apps that you can deploy, and then you can select the GPU types and things of that sort, and then they'll scale up. So.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about the metrics of your success. So I have some numbers here, but I think they're old. I think they're from May. So I have a user count, so number of users who have used your product, around 200,000. Is that still accurate or is that higher? I assume that's probably a little bit higher now.
Yeah, so anyone can actually see all of our metrics directly on the site. So if you go to chutes.ai/app/research, our user count today is actually 371,000.
Wow.
So yeah, a little bit of growth there.
Yeah, nice. And the total number of tokens was around 2 trillion. I think I saw go by an X that you guys had passed the 2 trillion tokens served mark. It's pretty amazing. So is that still?
Yeah. So now we're at about 7.3 trillion.
Oh my God. Okay, so quite a bit higher. Nicely done. And then, and so the other sort of stat I read was, this was a tweet from you guys. I think yesterday we hit 100 billion tokens processed per day. And for context, this is a third of what Google was processing just 1 year ago. So that, I mean, that is amazing, right? So, so with all this, so I'm trying to figure out like how to contextualize these numbers in terms of the broader AI landscape. Like, what percentage of AI serving are you doing? Do you have a sense of that? Is it like 5%? You know, just in the entire world of like all the AI that's being served up. Do you know?
Well, so that's a great question because there are so many different ways to actually access these AI models, right? You can do, direct through some of these frontier labs, and they often don't actually publish their numbers. So we have no idea, for example, the number of direct API calls that Claude would be doing. Now, we have proxies for that. So, for example, you can go to OpenRouter and actually, if you go to OpenRouter's homepage and then click on the rankings tab at the upper right, you can see sort of all of the models by usage, and you can do, by week or by day or whatever. So if you look, unsurprisingly, you'll have, Google with their Gemini models sort of at the top, along with Anthropic. But then if you look at number 5 and number 6, you'll see DeepSeek v30324 and DeepSeek v30324 free. So if you look at the free one, that is Chutes and Targon doing those. But it's insane to look at because we're at the 5th most used model, and that's the free version. So actually, if you included the free and the non-free, I think that would actually put it closer to number 3.
Wow.
But, and so that's behind Anthropic, Sonnet 4 and Gemini 2.0 Flash. So, as a percentage, I don't know. All I know is that there's a huge use case for these open weight models. And, we're serving the vast majority of the tokens on the DeepSeek v30324 free. And actually, we get asked this question a lot. I'm sure you may want to ask as well. But we sort of get a lot of pushback for doing, these free models. But, one of the core issues, I guess, with Bittensor or any crypto-related AI project is that there's sort of this like giant chasm between the AI world and the crypto world. And a lot of AI people just do not want to have anything to do with crypto whatsoever. Yeah. And so, the most important mission we can solve is basically chipping away at that barrier and getting more people to sort of understand the reason why we want something like Bittensor. And it really, it has, I don't want to say nothing to do with crypto, but really like crypto is what enables the decentralized, permissionless mechanism. Like that's the whole reason it all exists. Yeah. And, it's hugely important to have these sort of, competitive models available to anyone, and they're locked to a particular set of model weights. So, you're not going to have some random change in the API response quality at some point, new filters added, whatever. Yeah. So I did notice when DeepSeek first came out, you guys had it up, I think, like before anybody else. Like you got it up super fast. I did notice that. So, if you're looking for the new stuff, you guys are just on it. And that's like, that's huge. That's huge value right there. So you were mentioning the crypto versus AI thing. So the value proposition of Chutes is you can run these models for free, or I think at a steep discount also, because I do know that you have payments. And I know you recently added fiat payments. And I think before that you were accepting payments in TAO, the TAO token, right? So that was how people paid you. But the cost was something like 1/6 of what it would cost you if you hosted these models on AWS yourself. Plus, everything's already pre-assembled for you. So it's just, why wouldn't you want something that costs, 1/6 that is like, 1/10 of the work, right? It's a pretty awesome deal. However, it is subsidized
the reason why you can offer things for free or at a very low price is because you are getting emissions from the Bittensor TAO chain. You're basically getting emissions in this coin, kind of like the way Bitcoin miners work, where they get Bitcoins for mining Bitcoin, the chain, which you are then selling to pay for costs. Is this all correct?
Yep, that's exactly right. Yep. So, which is not to say that we won't offset that with revenue, but it's one of those things where if we immediately started charging, no one would have made that transition from the AI Web 2 space into Bittensor powered inference, right? And I think the discounts and things like this, these are all ways to sort of build trust and build up the product and show people why something like a decentralized platform actually makes a lot of sense. So yes, we are definitely 100% subsidized by Bittensor emissions. We are enabling fiat, and even something like fiat, it really has, it's not quite as simple as just, put a credit card on there, because things like OFAC compliance and all of these other things. And if you're trying to build a truly decentralized platform, you want to make sure you can actually accept payments from people that are in embargoed countries, right? So it's not quite so simple as just enabling payments. There's regulatory things and compliance to deal with and all of that kind of stuff. But we are finally at a point where not only do we have the TAO payments, which get automatically staked to the token, we wanted to do that instead of, as a company, keeping that as revenue or anything else, because by staking, we're basically increasing the value of Chutes for all token holders, which makes the most sense to us.
So just be clear, when the TAO comes in, so TAO, I pay you in TAO, you take my TAO that I just paid you with, and you buy Chutes tokens, right?
Yep,
or
exactly.
Technically, you stake TAO, which gives you Chutes tokens. So that's what you just said. Okay.
Yep. And so when we originally made this design, I think it was maybe a couple weeks after dTAO was launched. I think we were the first, or one of the first subnets, I think the first, to start actually staking our revenue into the alpha token. And at that point, as far as I know, the burn mechanism was not in place yet for burning alpha tokens. So I think there's an argument to be made there where instead of staking the tokens, we should just burn them to permanently eliminate them from the supply. So that's probably something we'll do at some point, which is fundamentally kind of the same thing, because either way we're sort of locking up, either staking or burning. But yeah, they're all locked up. And then same thing with fiat. So with fiat, it's kind of a bit of a manual process right now. Hopefully with some of these DeFi mechanisms that are coming on board, it won't be manual, but right now it's basically we take the dollars, convert them into TAO, stake to the alpha, and then that will also be public. So like all of our payments, everything is part of our API right now, so you can actually track that.
Okay, you said two things which seem to be at odds, and I'm sure there's an explanation, but I don't know what it is. So you said that you're basically subsidized by your emissions, but you're taking the payments and translating it into your subnet tokens. But you're also selling your subnet tokens. I guess they're not at odds. You're selling your subnet tokens, correct, to pay for things. Like what's the explain that to me?
Yeah, so the miners will sell the alpha token to pay for their server bills. Yep. I mean, unquestionably, that's just how things work in Bittensor. And then same thing with the validators. So the validators, it's a bit of an interesting topic, because that 41% of the so if you don't know, there's a 41 split to miners, 41 to validators, and then 18% to subnet owners. The 41% that goes to the validators, really the validators only get like 9 or 18% of that, because they have a take. The rest of it actually just goes to the token holders who are staking. Yes. So most of the validator
token holders who have staked with a particular validator, they get
Correct.
the bulk, and the validators get 9 to 18%, kind of depending on how they set. It's whatever they offer, right? So. Yeah, if you have to be careful which validator you stake with, because you're going to get a different deal from each one. So anyway, please continue.
Yeah, so the selling is going to come from all three of those pools, right? It's going to come from the miners who have to pay for their hardware. It's going to come from the validators to pay for their hardware. Granted, on Chutes, it's actually really, really cheap to run a validator besides the main one, because they use like a lightweight auditing system to replicate the weights. And then the subnet, like we have bills, we have employees, we have expenses to run, and we run the main primary validator.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it is at odds to an extent, but I think it sets the precedent. So at some point, the revenue will far exceed the amount that we would need to cover the expenses, right?
Yep.
And so at that point, if the system is already in place where all revenue is staked regardless, then even though like we could set aside some from the revenue and then just keep that, but it's a much cleaner, easier thing to understand that revenue goes to the alpha token. We do sell some of the alpha token to fund operations. It's just how it works.
Yep, just how it is. So where do you think? Actually, let me ask you a different question. So if I am a miner in the Chutes universe, I am basically supplying GPU to you, right, to serve up all these models and the inference. In what respect do I supply GPU? Do I supply a machine with a specific model loaded on it? Or do I just sort of, supply my GPU, which you then take and put into kind of a grid, like an abstracted compute grid, and you manage all the stuff on top of it? Like, how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so really it comes down to the incentive mechanism that we provide. So on Chutes, we have 4 categories of scoring for our incentive mechanism.
Yep.
First is compute units, which is basically the number of seconds your GPU was used. Second is the number of actual requests that you serve, regardless of the amount of compute that they used, but just the sheer number of requests. And then there's a bounty mechanism. So bounties are for what we call cold starts, meaning you either deploy a brand new model or there's a model that isn't being used, so it gets spun down to 0 nodes. And someone requests that, well, we want the user experience to be that model gets loaded very quickly. So we have a bounty score to initialize, to incentivize the miners to get that model running quickly. And then we have what we call a unique Chute score, which is basically the breadth of models that every miner is running. So that, we want most of the models to stay hot, so they're always available to users as they need them. So ideally, we kind of avoid the bounty mechanism entirely because the model is already ready to go. So, so that said, we at Chutes, we don't control what miners deploy at all. That's sort of like the intelligence behind Chutes mining is you as a miner are trying to optimize for those 4 categories. So, maybe you just have a lot of raw compute that you want to throw at the most used models. Maybe you have, really fast startup because you have all of the model weights on RAM disks with really fast network and you can load them quickly for bounties, whatever the case may be. And so by just defining that incentive mechanism, the miners will basically perfectly scale any of the models to whatever the inventory is at the time. And, people give us a hard time sometimes for saying we don't really have like intelligence on Chutes, but really, I mean, if you think about the complexities of DevOps and scaling and, if you were to try, for example, to define an auto scaling metric for a model, what would it be? It can't just be GPU utilization, because whether you have 1 request in flight or 100, the usage will still be 100% because it's going to use up all of the cores to do those matrix multiplications. So you can't really look at that. You can't really look at just the number of requests because maybe there's a lot of input processing versus output. And, so to try to like manually define all of these parameters to scale yourself is actually kind of tricky to do. Whereas, that's what we have farmed out to the miners. They control scaling the apps and cold starts and everything else.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. So yeah, so it's basically, it's not abstracted compute. It is very specific machines or it's model oriented. I guess you decide, you as the miner decide like how many machines you want to dedicate to a model, but what you are serving up, it's model centric. That is the atomic unit of the Chutes universe. And I have to basically slot into that definition in order to earn emissions. So, okay, now that makes it makes a lot more sense to me now. Okay. So where are you going with this? What do you think this business, the business of Chutes, looks like at maturity? Let's say, I don't know, 2 years from now. Is it profitable? Is it generating revenue profitably? What does the ultimate success look like for you guys?
Yeah, so I think it's important to maybe just go back to sort of what is the goal and what is Bittensor trying to achieve and all of this stuff. And so, one of the things that actually got me into this sort of LLM universe is that models from these frontier labs would randomly decide to censor responses from. So I was working on an e-discovery company, sort of doing like legal Q&A of documents, right? And some of these models would just refuse flat out to answer, even though I've given them the documents and I've said, give me the names, addresses, and times from this document or whatever the case may be. Yeah. And it would respond like, no, this is censored because it looks like you're trying to dox someone or, something like that.
Yeah.
And so if you think about Chutes, we're trying to be sort of a permissionless and open source platform so that if you're a builder, you know that this is the model. This is exactly the response you're going to get. We're not going to add in some sort of new system prompt. You can go see the source code. You can deploy your own version of the model if you want to use a different inference engine. You can deploy an uncensored model if you need, whatever the use case is. And there's never going to be sort of like with OpenAI or any of these other companies, maybe they prevent people in the EU from using their model because of regulatory compliance. Maybe we sanction, Russia. Maybe China takes the lead. They have their frontier lab and they block the US. So there's all these situations where we really need sort of permissionless above anything, but also decentralized. Yeah. And so, and to accomplish that, one of the reasons we started Chutes was that we had compute subnets, but we didn't have ones that were sort of stateless that would survive minor deregistrations and things of that sort. And so we wanted to build a purely stateless compute substrate that would do all of the, failover and scaling and all of that kind of stuff. So for us, success is really being sort of that universal compute substrate for anything that you want to do related to AI or, potentially not related if we do like CPU only website hosting. And so, getting more adoption. And again, it's also about bringing the people on board that are currently sort of anti-crypto. And so, yes, revenue will come. We're actually, I think either today or by the end of the week, flipping off free models entirely, but it'll still have a free tier. So we can discuss that. And I don't know if the numbers are completely decided yet, but basically it'll be kind of like Google Gemini where you have a free tier and then beyond that it's pay-go. We might have subscription plans and things of that sort. So in terms of revenue, yeah, we're switching that into gear right now. And profitability is one of those interesting questions because I guess it depends on what your definition is. By profit,
go ahead.
I was going to say, if by profitability you mean that what we have to sell is less than what we bring in, that's one question. If by that you mean the sum of all emissions for the subnet across owner, validator, and miner, whether they get sold or not, that is a sort of a different question. Because again, the 41% to validators, that's all staking mostly. And, a lot of that just gets held for the APY. And then the 18% to owners, my share is completely locked up, going to be locked up in a smart contract where it will just be inaccessible.
Heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for us to achieve is to actually just offset all of the miner costs more than anything else. And then we can start tackling the validator and the owner emissions. But profitability by my reasonable standard to start with would be offsetting all miner emissions with revenue. And then in theory, we could actually just start paying the miners in stablecoins or something if we wanted to instead of TAO. I don't want to do that. I mean, I don't think that really makes sense. The whole mechanism is already built in. But yeah, I think we do still have sort of one barrier though, as a Bittensor ecosystem to get into sort of like the mass revenue cycle. And that is, it's like a blessing and a curse is we have no idea who the miner is on the other end of that UID. And so, we have a ton of verification and validation mechanisms in place to ensure the miners are always doing the right thing. But the limitation is really the privacy concern. And so we need a way to prove that your prompts will never get out, right? If we want to onboard businesses, we need to make sure your data and your code is always completely confidential. And so, and that's not a Chutes problem. That's
AI wide. I mean, I have some friends that are screenwriters, and I know one that has written a rom-com with a very, very unique sort of premise to it. And she wanted to upload it to an AI to have it analyze sort of where the breaks were in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And another screenwriter friend said, don't do it, because once you do that, the AI now knows your plot. It's now training data, and and your really unique premise may be spit out in an answer to somebody else. Yeah,
exactly.
So it's pretty dangerous for IP. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that we're working on and trying to get out as soon as humanly possible is having TEE for the miners, which is it means trusted execution environments. And so like Targon has this, for example, with their TVM. Yep. And so TEE is great in that anything inside that VM is going to be encrypted and it's going to be guaranteed. You can actually check like with cryptographic signatures that it's in a secure environment. But there's still a bunch of attacks you can do on TEE. Like you can actually just use file system mounts and stuff to inject random binaries. You can open backdoors. You can do side channel attacks. You can corrupt the memory. So it's not quite so simple as just enabling TEE. But that said, we're getting very close. We have it working in dev. And what that will do is it will actually allow us to prove not only that all of your data is always encrypted, but that the code that's running, we can actually do, like as part of the initialization process of the machine, you can have it be part of that TDX signature. I know I'm probably speaking Greek a little bit, but
yeah, you only lost me when you said TV. I understood everything up until TV. What does TVX stand for? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, TDX is Intel's version of TEE. It's just their technology.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
And so, anyways, a bunch of technical mumbo jumbo, but what it will guarantee is that the software is exactly what we say it is, and you can go download our source code and you can compare it to the actual image. You can inspect the files. You can compare checksums. And from that, you will also see that we have all logging disabled. No one is ever going to see your prompts. Even if you have like direct physical access to the machine, you can't pull out the RAM and copy anything from it. And the prompts never go anywhere. And I think that's, Bittensor, or sort of in general, I think the philosophy is always don't trust, verify. And so in this scenario, that's exactly what we're trying to do. You don't have to trust us that your data is private. You can actually just go check the report, compare the source code, and know for certain that it's never going to be leaked. Like you can trust the system with your proprietary data.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I mean, I do that. It is one of the things I love about Bittensor is that it is, what OpenAI, it is what OpenAI should have been, right? Like we should have this sort of ethos of, the information is private and, your prompts are private. For sure what models you're running and, whether it's decapped in some way or not, right? You know exactly what you're getting. And that is the world we want to live in. And I firmly believe in that, that religion, that has always served us well in the past. When the internet was newly born, there were all kinds of, debates over whether encryption should be allowed, whether free speech should be allowed, right? Thankfully, we got the right answers on those, but we're now sort of facing those same questions again with AI. And we're seeing the same bad actors sort of raise their hands and try to get their grubby little mitts on it and corrupt it. So we have to make sure that this vision, somebody with this vision, hopefully Bittensor, but but in general, everybody, this vision is the one that wins. So I'm definitely very on board with that. However, in order for that to win, just like the internet needed this to win, you need commercial successes, right? You do need the speculation. It's part, if we're doing capitalism, then you got to have capitalism in all of its, the ugly as well as the ugly is also good in some ways, right? So the speculation powers the innovation. And so, what I'm really trying to get at, I guess with the profitability question is, and I'm still trying to figure this out. I don't know what the answer to this is. We haven't really had a breakout subnet yet that goes to $1 billion in valuation or maybe beyond, right? Maybe $10 billion in valuation and is somehow, really sustainable in terms of revenue and usage and all that stuff. The closest example we have is you guys, right? You guys have gotten the furthest towards achieving fusion, but I don't think anybody has really achieved fusion totally yet. And I'm trying to figure out, like, what does that look like? How does it happen? Does the subnet have to buy back its own tokens? Is it okay for the subnet to not be profitable at all? To just sort of, and there's an argument for that because that is indeed how Bitcoin miners work, right? Bitcoin miners don't have another business. They mine Bitcoin and then they sell it. They sell emissions, right? So, maybe that's okay, right? Like, I don't know. And there are definitely a lot of different opinions on this. So when I ask the question, like, where are you guys going? I'm really asking the question, what does a successful subnet look like? What are the characteristics of it? Maybe the subnet token has to have utility, like you demand payment in your token only, which maybe that's bad, maybe that's good, I don't know, but that is an option, right? So in your opinion, and I don't know if you formed an opinion on this, what is down the road when we see the first breakout subnet, what do you think the characteristics of that are? Does it have to be profitable or does it not?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that. Well, I guess, does it have to be, or maybe the other question is, should it be? So, exactly like you said, Bitcoin, there is no revenue there. It's purely speculation, really. I mean, there are apps built on top and everything else, but really the miner, it's only cost. Like you don't generate a product by mining Bitcoin. And so, and I think, what do we spend on mining Bitcoin per year just for power and equipment and stuff like that? It's what, 12 billion or something?
It's insane. I don't know the actual numbers, but it's
big. So it's a lot of money and it's purely speculation, really. And I mean, there's other sort of second level, markets that unlocks, but at the same time, so if we think about AI versus something like Bitcoin, you can't go use the commodity that Bitcoin provides. I mean, you can use Bitcoin.
There isn't one. There isn't one.
No. All that compute is, it maintains the ledger, which is incredibly important. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's very, very much important, but it's also one of those things where, if we were to put, the $12 billion per year, if we were to match that and put that into Bittensor and we didn't monetize at all, is opening up free and sort of incredibly powerful, unlimited, permissionless access to intelligence worth that expense, even if there was no revenue to speak of whatsoever. You know, if you think about the calculator and how important it is to succeeding, and now like having a laptop or something, AI is becoming that. So you're not going to be able to get through college or anything else at some point, or even a job, if you're not using some sort of AI integration. Maybe it's Cursor to help you augment your coding, or whatever, PowerPoint help, grammar checking, you name it. So if you're not using these things, you're sort of uncompetitive in the marketplace. And so I think it's important that we not lose sight of the fact that opening up AI to the world, just to make sure we don't have these siloed things where you have to spend $200 a month to use Claude Pro, and then maybe you're gated access because of the country you live in and all these kinds of things. So let's, before I answer the other question, let's just not lose sight of this is an expense that I think as a global population we should probably work on regardless, just to make sure we don't sort of leave people behind in the AI landscape. That said, what does a breakout subnet look like and in terms of revenue? I mean, I think the first one that has sort of massive profit margins and actual demand for it. So you could have 100% profit margin, but if you're only making $1 a day, does it really matter? No, it doesn't matter. So yeah. The first one that has like mass revenue and high profit margins, I think, that could it would skyrocket emissions if they bought back their token, because they're putting in way more, so the alpha pool would basically go to zero and you would only have tau in it. And so the price would be sort of infinite. And I think, there is that possibility. But I wonder, usually those kinds of cycles are short-lived. Because, let's take, for example, any of the agents or like virtuals or anything else. You'll see like massive skyrocketing, and then nearly as quickly a massive plummet.
Crater. Yeah. Yeah, I followed that whole thing when it happened. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like these second and third order apps that are going to be built on top of all the subnets that exist today, if their margins are that high, you can be guaranteed that many competitors will jump in the race. And then that, the actual value proposition is going to drop over time as well, right? Because you're just going to have competition. And so, when I think about Chutes, it's like we're trying to get that foundational level right for Bittensor, because whether we achieve AGI tomorrow, whether it's a brand new agent, whether it's some new thing that we haven't seen before, either way, it needs to run somewhere. And what better place for it to run than on a permissionless network like Bittensor and specifically Chutes. So, we're trying to be sort of like the stable foundation for any of these apps that could, blow up to run on. And, I hope that at some point we do have something that sort of really achieves escape velocity. From our end, the foundation is the most important thing, but we're also trying to build these second and third order apps on top. Like we did the agents platform. Yeah. We did an alpha version of a chat interface that's going to be similar to like ChatGPT, but you can also select whichever model. We need to integrate more of the models into it. Maybe we start doing like a visual studio type, not Visual Studio, the IDE, but
not
like
programming. Yeah.
Yeah, images and videos and things like that. Like I know there's demand for sort of translating videos and adding lip sync on top and doing we can do all of that in Chutes, but we don't have like a place to go do that. And so these apps are where you get the higher profit margins, and I think that would help drive revenue. And so us as Chutes, I think our team needs to work on like, okay, we have the foundation now working very well. You can see exponential growth in token usage and model growth and everything else. But now we need to actually start tying all of these models together in a cohesive manner and making these apps that can potentially, have these much higher profit margins that are just making use of the commodity on Chutes. So yeah, I think it'll be a dangerous thing in a sense. If you do have one of these completely snowballing subnets, because it would dry up everything. All emissions would go there over time. And I wonder, if it's too short lived, then what happens?
So we don't want a virtual thing, because that was, some of the tokens blew up to, like, as I remember, like 2 billion was one of them. AIXBT, I think, was one of them. I get Eliza and the virtual thing mixed up, because they feel like the same thing to me in a lot of ways. But what I observed was they were basically chatbots. They're basically meme coins with mouths on X, right? That's pretty much all they were. But the people could see them. They were very visible. They could touch them, taste them, talk to them. And for a lot of people, it was very magical. And the first time that they talked to an AI or an agent like that, right? So it felt like something very valuable, wrongly or rightly. And it was crypto people who blew it up to like 5 billion or 2 billion in valuation, and then very quickly realized it was kind of bullshit, and blah, down went everything, right? So, and that we don't want that. We don't want that kind of volatility in the Bittensor world. The Bittensor world is very much more austere. It's serious people doing serious shit, right? We don't want to be too serious, but it is serious people doing serious things. All of the, for the most part, all of the projects are very good attempts at very interesting, real things. They're not meme coins with mouths, right? So, but getting back to your point about the 12 billion that is spent mining Bitcoin, the reason why those miners are doing it is because they know they can make money, right? They know it's a business. They know that those Bitcoins at some point are going to be worth a lot more than what it costs to mine them, right? Ostensibly. That's the bet anyway. It's largely been true. So I think in order to have that $12 billion powering, and I agree with you, it'd be much better used for powering AI and sort of creating, what open AI should have been for the world, so that anyone of anywhere on Earth can access very powerful AI that's not censored, that's not kneecapped, that services their needs, that doesn't steal their prompts. Like that, we do want that world. I completely agree with that, but that has to be powered by somebody putting money in because they think they're going to get more out, right? Which is whatever venture capitalist does. That's what every Bitcoin miner does, and so that sort of cycle of, I put $1 in the black box here at this end. How soon does $10 come out the other end? That has to be better known, or at least better guessed, I think, than what we figured out collectively in the Bittensor universe. And I think we're on our way there, but we're not there yet. That makes sense? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, in that respect, like in the actual business sense, I think Bittensor is still pretty early in its evolution, right? I mean, so we have a lot of work to do. And again, these privacy concerns and security and stuff like that is just something we have to solve as a network. TEE is one way to do it. There are other technologies and stuff like that. But I think until we have that as like a guarantee, it's really hard to convince an enterprise to give us the dollars that they would otherwise give to, I don't know, Together or whoever. So, but yeah, definitely. No, I completely agree. There needs to be revenue. I think it doesn't necessarily need to be profitable right away. I think it just needs to be something that you have like a plan for. And so, even like what we've achieved so far at peak, I think we did about 160 billion tokens in one day. And so, the vast majority, something like 90% of that is the DeepSeek. Looking at the stats right now. So DeepSeek V3 and R1, the new R1, the old R3 or V3, stuff like that. So, even if we achieved that level with fully paid, say we charged 50 cents per million input or output, that's a pretty good chunk of revenue per day. Now, when we immediately flip that switch, though, again, we have this sort of conscious barrier of like, oh, well, you're crypto, so there's that we have to overcome. And then there's the fact of privacy and the fact that, we're not a traditional Web2 company that has sort of these established, roots and things like that. So I don't think we'll be immediately able to flip that switch and charge full price and get, like all customers converted from free to paid. It just won't work that way. But I think what we've been trying to show is that, number one, the platform works extremely well. Bittensor works extremely well. We can outcompete. So, Together AI, when I think, if memory serves, and I could be totally wrong here, but if memory serves, when they did their last fundraising round, I think they had mentioned something about 160 billion tokens per day. And they've been around for a while now. Chutes is 6 months old, and we hit the same numbers in 6 months because of proper incentive design and Bittensor and things like that. So I think the goal for us, yes, we obviously want to achieve profitability. And again, it kind of depends on what your definition is. But I think it's, again, more important to unlock the $10 trillion AI market by getting these AI people to start trusting some of these crypto projects. And we do that slowly over time, building trust and everything else. And no doubt there has to be, I guess there isn't with Bitcoin, but there has to be some flywheel that people are looking forward to. And we're on our way. We're building it.
Yeah, some thesis at least, some sort of, at least, I think it's here and I think it works like this. So we're going to try this model, right? And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but we get those experiments running because somebody's going to crack it. I feel very certain of that, actually, within the Bittensor universe. So it is by far the most, the most fertile ground of all these experiments out there, by far, in my opinion. So just why I'm spending my life studying it. So yes. Yeah. So we're on the same page.
Well, and especially with dTAO, there wasn't quite as much pressure before, but now it's very much accelerated things, I think.
Well, let's talk about dTAO, because actually that's where I was going to go next, right? So I think in many ways it's been a great success. Technically it was a fantastic success. That kind of an upgrade to a chain flawlessly out of the gate was extremely impressive. And all the sort of nooks and crannies, I have some nits about the UIs of some of the websites, but like taostats.io worked flawlessly on day one. That is incredible. I was actually very blown away by that. So, because I know the kind of work and the kind of testing that took to achieve that. And that was just insanely awesome. And I do think that dTAO has largely been a success, even financially. A lot of people did very well out of the gate. I think at the moment we're starting to see sort of, the first challenge of it, where a lot of the subnets are down, and some of this is just market volatility. Some of this is just the broader market being down, right? Like Powell's not cutting rates, so everybody's depressed and not investing in anything. So that's a big part of it. There's a big drag coming down from macro on everything. But I also think sort of the subnets, there is a lot of disagreement on whether the root emissions are too high. The root is too damn high, as I keep saying, right? So my first question is do you think that's true, that people are not coming off of root because the root emissions are too high? So why would I move out of my parents' basement and go and take risks on subnets? Do you think that's a problem? And number two, this morning they just announced, or I saw Kant's tweet, that there has been a limit of 128 subnets, at least temporarily, imposed for the foreseeable future, so that no new subnets can be created, which I think is a very good move personally. I think it's good gardening, right, if you will. So what do you think of that move, and what do you think about the thesis that the root is too damn high?
Yeah, so I think the cap of 128 is, I think, a good move right now. We already have open slots that are for sale. So I don't think that there's going to be a ton of pressure anytime soon, even capping it to 128. I think if you're a brand new subnet, it might be kind of hard to get out of the immunity period. But at the same time, with sort of so many teams that have just given up, that was another sort of surprising aspect of dTAO, is a lot of teams just vanished. Not a lot, but some of the teams.
They were forced to live on their own wits, right? They were no longer sucking off the emissions of the chain and not really doing much, right? So
Yeah.
this forced them into the sunlight, which was the purpose of this whole thing, right? So I think it's market pressures.
Yeah, so I think it's good and bad in the sense that it's going to have sort of more competitive force on the subnet teams, which is great. But it will be probably kind of challenging to be a brand new subnet. And like it's actually really hard to get, again, people from the AI Web 2 world into the Bittensor world. There's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of sort of things you have to go through. You have to start, finding and getting to know the validators. The documentation on Substrate is not necessarily the best yet. So there's a lot of hurdles to even start. And if you're trying to convince one of these like super talented teams that will have this breakout moment, to get them on board, and then suppose they register the subnet, but then don't dump a bunch of their own funds into it to bump up the price to, sort of get them out of that deregistration zone. Well, then they're probably not going to try again, right? So I think it's slightly dangerous in trying to attract the new talent that we're going to need to push Bittensor forward. But overall, I think it's really good to sort of drive that competitive pressure up. And I mean, there's this idea, even in subnets today, this idea of dust, meaning emissions being paid out to miners who aren't truly, adding any value to the subnet. And I think the same thing, is true to an extent. If we had unlimited subnets, we would have unlimited dust paid out to all these subnets that aren't really doing anything. So, net benefit, I think it's absolutely the best move, but maybe some things to think about on attracting talent and deregistration. And then, sorry, what was the other question? I forgot already.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been a lot of discussion, most of it emanating from Ready AI's CEO, right, about whether the root emissions are too high, right? And I've seen them as high as like 25% APY. Right now, they're sort of floating around 12%, still pretty good, right? So the thesis is, well, only 8.5% of tau is staked into dTAO. So, the rest of it, 60-ish% of it is just hanging out in root, collecting that 12% all fat and happy, right? And the remainder of it is just liquidity on centralized exchanges largely. So what do we got to do to get that 60% to sort of move out of root where it's just being, getting fatter every day and become more useful and start betting on some subnets? Are we paying them too much to just sit there? That's the question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so, the one thing I think about is all of the money that's not in Bittensor, right? All these, enormously wealthy people and institutions that could potentially invest in Bittensor. If you approach them and say, hey, there's this thing called dTAO. It's part of tau. There's 128 subnets. Every subnet has different, if you try going down that rabbit hole, it's going to be really hard to be like, you should put your $1 million and go research all of the subnets and then, start investing in them. I think it's a really hard sell. And I think the liquidity right now is so small that even if you wanted to invest a huge amount of money into one of the subnets, slippage and everything else, and with the sort of,
it's hard to put a lot of money in. Yeah.
It's hard to put a lot of money in, and it's very deflationary to an extent, right? Or inflationary right now. So I think it's a much easier sell. What we need more than anything is just people getting involved in the tau ecosystem in general. And so I think for these, institutional dollars, keeping it in root is probably the first step, and it's probably the only step many of them will take initially, until they have a team dedicated to actually researching some of the subnets. And even then, I mean, what percentage of the subnets do you think any particular team is going to invest in? Maybe it's 4 or 5. I mean, how much time do you have for due diligence? How much time does it take?
Those investors, those institutional people, they won't do that, but they will look for a hedge fund who will go and do that for them. You know, and they're
Sure.
basically people who are just living their lives in subnets, right? So,
Yeah.
and those entities are popping up very quickly. I'm talking
Yeah.
to a lot of those people, and I'm even talking to some of those institutional investors that are very wealthy. And I can assure you, they are looking at this, and they are
Yeah.
definitely interested. So,
Yeah. So, I mean, pros and cons, right? Like a high root APY is really good for just attracting those dollars that aren't necessarily going to go chase the subnets, and I think that's important. But at the same time, subnets are Bittensor. If you don't have, alpha token liquidity and money going in, then, I mean, what's going to happen to Bittensor? So I think we need to find a balance, but I don't think we should be necessarily, we're only how many months in to dTAO, and we haven't really let it. Yeah.
yeah.
So we're talking about potentially doing these giant changes only a few months in for a system that is enormously complex. And what I heard would be sort of a good in between, and I don't know that anyone could really argue against it, is that the token holders, the stakers, the root stakers, can opt in to having their staking rewards be the alpha tokens that they were proportionally staked to. So like an airdrop, basically. So rather than saying root selling goes away, or we drop the proportion from 18 to, whatever, or, something, that's a good first step, because then anyone who wants to participate directly in the subnets, but doesn't necessarily want to do all of the work of going in and investigating each, they can opt in to say, okay, well, I'm just going to stake to these validators on root, whatever, but I want my rewards to be in the alpha tokens. And then they wouldn't be auto sold. It would reduce the root sell pressure for all of those who did opt in. It kind of alleviates a lot of, I think, some of the absolute whales of Bittensor would opt into that. So even if it's not 100% of the TAO that opts in, I think it's enough that it would have a pretty noticeable effect on root sell pressure. And this is something, I don't know who the origin of the idea is. It's definitely not me. I think it was either Const or one of the Macrocosmos people. I don't know where the origin of this idea of the airdrops instead of auto root sell, like the opt-in. But I think that we should be careful. We don't want to just upend the whole thing after 4 months of letting it play out. But something like this would have a net positive effect, I think, on
Keith Singery actually had a similar idea. It wasn't exactly what you just said, but he was basically saying what we should do is instead of I'm trying to remember what instead of he basically wanted to take he wanted to, like your proposal or like the proposal you just referenced, not reduce the selling. The selling pressure is the issue, right? Of coming out of root for subnet tokens, because it's depressing the price of the subnet tokens with emissions from the chain. So instead of doing that, he basically said, well, recycle the TAO and just chuck it to the end of basically it doesn't get sold and it doesn't get burned, because we never actually burn TAO. We just throw it, we throw it in before the halving. So it gets recycled back to the end of the line, and that's where it goes. And that at least gets the boot off the subnet selling neck, right? So for the time being. Yeah. So I kind of like that idea. That's an idea in a similar vein to the one you just brought up. So
these are really, really complicated questions. I'm a simple AI backend engineer, so
you're like, it's not my thing, man. I'm out. Yeah, no, it's look, it's a complicated thing, and I my personal opinion is that the root emissions are too high, however, I've been surprised by the brilliance of the core Bittensor team several times now, both with the dTAO launch itself and in sort of the surprisingly good design of dTAO. Because when it first launched, I realized that having early information didn't do you any good. Right, basically the prices are the way the subnets are born, and they emit their liquidity with just these crazy prices for the subnet tokens, at least initially, makes it so whales can't just come in and slurp the whole thing. That design is fantastic, right? Like I love that. And it defeats everything that's bad about meme coins and the broader crypto world at large. So I have great respect for sort of the ingenuity of these designs not being immediately obvious, or at least not to me, and me later figuring out like, oh, that I see why they did that now. That's actually great. I actually applaud this. So even though I think, perhaps it's the wrong move to reduce the root emissions because it upsets some other part of, this carefully constructed thing that they've put a lot more thought into than I have. So I don't, I'm not sure if I'm right, but from the outside looking in, it does look like to me that the root emissions are too high, or at least the selling pressure should be alleviated in the near term. I do think the reduction of, basically making the move to limit the number of subnets to 128 is indirectly attacking this root emission problem, right? By stopping the gushing of new emissions, because each new subnet that's born gushes a bunch of new emissions into root and artificially jacks up that the APY and creates a lot more sell pressure, right? So at least so it indirectly affects that. So it's probably constant acknowledging that there's something you should do here in part, but not without actually directly monkeying around with the innards of what is probably a very carefully constructed emission schedule that, if you monkey with it, it has other effects that I don't know about. So anyway, end of speech on that. Hopefully we'll get there. Hopefully we'll figure it out. I think the other side of that equation is that what would also solve it is a lot more buying of subnet tokens from a lot more money coming into the ecosystem. And from where I sit, that looks like it's about to stampede in from institutionals, as well as, I'm not sure about consumer. I used to think consumer was going to, because of all the bridges to Solana and Ethereum and all that stuff is coming, and I think it will have a material effect. But I actually think the institutional money, Altucher, we're seeing an announcement of a new hedge fund or a new dTAO treasury company every day. So I think that money is coming, and I think it'll arrive with a suddenness that surprises a lot of people. And I think a good part of it will go into subnet tokens. So that also solves the problem, right? So yeah, let's hope. I mean, I think again, revenue is also going to play a part there, right? Because that's going to drive token buying. So I mean, we could all the subnets can work on that at least. Yeah. So we're almost up on the hour here. One last question before we go. So I'm told that one of your core devs is a guy named Namare. Is that correct? Well, yeah. So Namare is sort of the founder of Rayon Labs. So I wouldn't necessarily call him a core dev. I would call him sort of the Rayon mastermind. Okay. And he's not doxxed, so we don't know who he is, right? That's correct also. And my understanding is he's sort of the driver behind DeepSeek getting up like within 3 seconds of release. Like he's sort of responsible for a lot of those things. Is that true or not? Or am I giving him too much credit? Yeah, no, that's fake news. That's fake news. Well, then never mind. All right. No. So Namare, he's actually sort of, so he was doing Subnet 19, right? He was the lead, core dev Subnet owner from pre-dTAO days. And then he, sort of at the end of the year, I forget when Gradient's registered, but so he has sort of stepped more like up, I guess, to a more management type level where he's actually coordinating Gradient's 19 and Chutes because he is the sort of the founder of Rayon. So the actual core AI and backend work, so it's my fault those models get up so fast because I'm like obsessed. Okay, so it's you. You're the guy doing it. Okay. But no, yeah, I mean, Namare, at this point, he's definitely got a lot on his plate with managing the 3 subnets. So he doesn't get into like the AI deployment necessarily on Chutes very, very often. Got it. Okay. All right, John, listen, thank you so much for taking an hour to explain this little world to us. Super fascinating. And if you have something you want to plug, like websites or Twitter handles, now's the time. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, just head over to Chutes.ai. We've got some. We just hired a marketing company to start writing some sort of educational blogs about how Chutes works and things like that. So that'll be good. Head over to squad.ai to play with the agent platform. You can go to Corcel and use the models. Check out TAO stats. Buy a bunch of TAO.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. And the Twitter handle, the official Chutes Twitter handle is
Chutes_AI. And then there's also Rayon_labs is the parent one.
very good. All right, John. Thank you once again. My name is Mark Jeffrey. This has been Hash Rate. We'll see you all next time.
Thanks.